boards within. Okay, welcome. For those of you who are new and this is your first time joining us, my name is Tanner Withers. I'm the host of this special needs planning weekly workshop series. And again, for those of you who are new, an introduction to myself and why we do this. First and foremost, I'm a parent, just like most of us on this call of a child with special needs, and that's this little cutie right here. I have two cuties at home, but this is our cutie. She has a rare disease called Cornelia de Lange syndrome. We adopted her from Colombia about 7 months ago now, I believe. So she is our personal connection to the special needs community, and she is the reason that I do this work as a special needs planner and advisor and founder of All Ability Planning. So the purpose of this weekly series is to talk through different special needs planning topics such as financial benefits, estate organization, and family support. And we've got a really good one. I'll introduce that here in just a couple of minutes. For those of you unsure of kind of what to expect, the purpose of this workshop that we do every single week is to empower families of all abilities to live their life's potential. And that sounds really cute, warm and fuzzy deal. This is legitimate. And again, for all of us who are parents, we know that our kids are told over and over all of the things that they cannot do. And so instead of focusing on those limitations, which are very real, instead what we've decided is, hey, if we can just plan around it, if we can give them the best possible life, then that is a wonderful life. That's what we're trying to focus on here. The goal then of these workshops is to give you the information that you need to confidently take the next step in our special needs planning process. And the format looks like this. Typically, we do this in the evenings, but today we're doing it a little bit earlier. And so hopefully this will work out for all of those who are going to watch the recording. But we want to do just quick bite-sized information. There's a lot on our plates. There's a lot of things that we're all trying to learn and digest. And so we feel like if we can just do really quick bite-sized information that's highly valuable, that's going to serve our families really well. So we'll do about, call it 15 to 20 minutes worth of educational content. We will do some live Q&A for those of you who have questions. I will say as well, if you have questions throughout the presentation today, feel free to drop them in the chat as we go. I'll monitor the chat, and then we'll open it up to Lisa here at the end. Again, this is recorded in our Facebook group, so if you're not a part of our Facebook group, please go join, and you can see all of our past workshops there as well. Quick disclosure so that we can make sure that we keep doing this and we do this in a compliant way. Yes, I am a professional. Lisa is a professional. We do have some professionals on the call today. However, the information we're talking about today is for educational purposes only. This is not considered advice. If you're seeking advice, if you're not sure what to do, please reach out to somebody. We've got a lot of resources that we can connect you with, so we'd be happy to do that. All right, I'm excited to introduce the topic here. We've got Lisa Cohen, and I'll let her introduce herself here in just a minute, from Visible National Trust. I actually found out about Visible National Trust from Eric Jorgensen, who's also on the call with us today. And he's just an incredible advocate for the special needs community. But this is, when I first heard about it, I reached out to Eric and I said, I need you to tell me more, because this sounds like it's filling a need, filling a gap, a hole that a lot of us families have. And so I'd like you to confirm that for me. And sure enough, that's exactly what this is. And so I asked Lisa, would you please present on this topic? I think this is something that every single family who cares for a loved one with special needs to know about. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to unshare. I'm going to kick it over to you, Lisa, and I'll let you introduce yourself and take it from here.
Thank you so much, Tanner. I'm so thrilled to be with all of you here today. This is such a great group. Tanner is doing such a wonderful thing, and we are so proud to be a part of it. And thank you, Eric, for being the connective tissue, as you are in so many ways. So I am going to hit share. And I'm going to take you over to, as Tanner mentioned, my name is Lisa Cohen, and I am the CEO of Visible National Trust. I founded Visible National Trust a couple of years ago now, and we are now, we went through the whole startup phase, very exciting, and here we are in market. We have trust on the system. It's very exciting to be actually fulfilling the goal that we set out to fulfill. So we talk about visible national trust, and I'm going to try to do two things in this presentation. I want to share with you, to Tanner's point, a little bit about visible, but I also want to give you some information to the empowerment idea about how all special needs trusts operate. I think it's helpful for everyone to understand that. So if you've got a trust in place, you can ask the right questions, make sure you're getting information you feel good about, and just kind of learn a structure for a way to evaluate and look at the pieces of a special needs trust. So our tagline that we talk about is financial services for the world's largest minority. I think you all know that that's us, those of us who are special needs families. So I usually like to start at the beginning. The beginning here is that we really are the world's largest minority, 1 billion plus worldwide. These are stats you all may know well. And 1 in every 4 people in the US has a disability, according to the CDC. So not everybody's eligible for a special needs trust, but there's a total number of people who are being reported as having a disability. So what we set out to do was modernize the special needs trust world. And I'll talk about that in a second. I have a cute little graphic there. But my background is financial services, investment management, building financial products. I started out in the retirement business. And I kind of feel like I've come full circle. This is all about retirement and long-term financial planning. And our goal was to create a really easy to access, easy to use special needs trust. Take all the complexity out of it, allow financial advisors and their clients, beneficiaries, families to work together really easily. It's not that hard to get into your checking account anymore. And that is a level of service that we all should expect from a special needs trust. But it didn't really exist in the marketplace. So I set out to build it. And our goal is really to increase and support financial security for families caring for a loved one with a disability. So just a tiny bit of background on what's going on out there. And I think this is, although over multiple decades, generally a good thing. You all are, I'm sure, are familiar with these legislative pieces or acts. But there has been a steady drumbeat over many decades, many too long decades, supporting people for disabilities as a practical matter. The most recent thing that you'll start to hear about is the Secure Act, and what it means for people leaving IRAs to disabled or chronically ill beneficiaries. And it's a good thing. There are some tax benefits there for folks to take advantage of. So here's the history of trust, just to give you some perspective. We in America didn't invent them. They started around the time of the Crusades, so the story goes, to safeguard assets of whoever was involved in fighting the Crusades. For a long time, we were in this messy middle section where trusts have been, and this is all kinds of trusts, really complicated, attorney-driven, not a lot of self-service, and hard to really untangle. The last bit, that's us coming to the rescue and with a different approach for special needs trusts specifically. So the first question we get asked a lot is, so when should I be doing this? When should I think about it? And here are the things that we generally talk about. I would love to hear other things that other catalysts that you all experience in establishing that move you to establish a trust at a specific point in time. So we know that the only way to shelter actual cash that a beneficiary owns is to create a special needs trust. That way, and move the money into the special needs trust, any assets that the beneficiary has. And this is simply because with a special needs trust, the government doesn't see through the trust and they disregard those assets. So you get to use that money, keep it, and spend it on your loved one, which is the best thing ever. And that rule comes to us from the Social Security Administration. We also see a lot of different scenarios. So we talked to to families at a lot of different points in their life cycle. We talk to folks whose children or grandchildren could inherit funds. Doesn't have to be a lot to screw up benefits. And so we really encourage people to have a trust on kind of standby if that is something that one could expect to have happen in one's family. And Tanner makes such an excellent point, and he's the third bullet point. When you're working with somebody to do financial planning for your whole life, this is a need. It's just like we all need mortgages on our houses or pay rent. And so housing is a need, and disability financial planning is a need too. And special needs trusts are a cornerstone of that process. That's why we thought this was an important thing to focus on. If someone wants to make a gift, another family member, this can be, a special needs trust can be a way to accept a gift for benefit of the beneficiary, again, without compromising any benefits. Hugely important. Accident settlements are another reason. We talk to people about special needs trust, whether it's a class action or an individual situation. We talked to some folks later in their lives, grandparents who are thinking about how do I leave money to multiple beneficiaries in a family? And they're not going to do, perhaps college planning isn't in play for the child with a disability, but they want to sort of even it all out, set up a trust. And what you'll start to hear about more with the IRA beneficiaries who are disabled. So when mom and dad are setting up their beneficiaries, there's an additional step that will need to happen, and you actually get fantastic tax benefits from the IRA distribution. You're able to take it over as the disabled beneficiary your whole life. Great reason to set up a special needs trust. So please feel free to jump in anytime with questions. And I know I trust Tanner to manage all of that, but I'll just keep going for a bit. This is a diagram of kind of the core roles in a special needs trust. This is not specific to Visible, but this is what you will see, whether you see it clearly and your trust provider talks about it. We talk about it very clearly that each of these parties are part of the whole, making the trust happen. It kind of begins with the core piece there, the trust document. All trusts start with a legal document. The legal document is not a company. It is not a person. And it is strictly a document. So when somebody talks about owning a trust, or the trust document is the important, the starting point. The trustee is the entity. It could be a person or it could be a company. In our case, it's a company. It's a nonprofit organization that is our trustee. And nonprofits have a long history of managing money, which is a really good thing. So the trustee in any trust situation is kind of the final decision maker on certain things. For special needs trusts, it's investments, and it's also distributions. The other moving parts are trust administration. That's when you call somebody, call the 800 number, and you need something taken care of, or you need a specific form. That's a job and a function in our case as well. We have a company that does that, that we run. You'll need a custodial bank. So eventually all money lands in a bank somewhere, and special needs trust funds are no different. So the bank is the organization, is the enterprise who is tasked with making sure the money's there and reporting on it. The investment manager or investment advisor, they're responsible for investing the funds. However that happens, and there are multiple ways for that to happen. You need somebody focused on reporting and tax materials. And then how do the checks go out? How do the payments get made for beneficiaries? So obviously special needs trust beneficiaries have to meet the Social Security definition of disability. But it sounds like you guys have been talking about this for a while and know about that. And another important point we want to make sure people understand is the irrevocable nature of special needs trusts. So the money goes in, it stays in a special needs trust, can't be used for anything else. Ideally, when you're looking at a special needs trust, visible or any other, whether it's an attorney or you still need to know who's playing all of these roles. Here's what it looks like for us. I won't go through it in detail, but what I've done is just taken the chart we just looked at and listed how it works at Visible. So BlackRock is our money manager, Huntington National Bank is our bank, and they do payments and a bunch of other things, including custody. Capital Motion is our trust administrator, and Visible Foundation is the trustee. Those are kind of the big shops in place. This is what our website looks like, just to give you a frame of reference. We have what I think is the most important thing here, honestly, is the client login, which it makes this very self-service and very easy to use. That's something you want to look for. How easily do you have access to the things you need to do? Request a distribution, make a contribution, any other piece. You'll want to take a look at how do the investments work? And this should be something that you get. This is our one-page overview. You should be looking for something like this that explains, once the money comes in, how does the trustee think about investing it? And fees. There's no reason for special needs trust fees. There's no good reason for special needs trust fees to be hard to get at. This should be information that you're provided with right up front. So these are, for example, Visible's fees. And if you work with an advisor, that advisory fees will be incorporated as well. But our core basic product fees are outlined there. So on an annual basis, what you're looking at, the one-time setup, for us, it's not an arduous process. There's the annual spending and funding review. The account gets funded, beneficiaries request distributions, and then you have total portal access to everything. That's another thing you should be looking for from anybody that you work with. You should have continuous online access to statements, reports, account balances, all that kind of information. No need to check it every day. Trusts see much less activity than, say, a checking account that you got to keep an eye on. But that's the basic. And then it's rinse and repeat, excluding the setup. So on an annual basis, you're still going to do spending planning. That's what we do. Funding the account, if it's still being funded, distributions are ongoing, and you can access the materials. I'm sure that you've covered some of this, so Tanner, feel free to pop in and wave me off. There's some of the things that we think are really important about special needs trust specifically is that other people can participate in funding them. So once the trust is up and running and established by the grantor, other people can contribute. And that's a wonderful way to include family, broader family and friends and community. So with us, it's pretty easy. You just need to designate which trust in our program the funds are going to. And we can provide that information. You want to understand how can the trust be funded? So can you move in this? Could you move in your IRAs? Can you deal with real estate? Will the trust manage securities if you have some holdings in a trust that's somewhere else and you want to move it? How does that all work? And if it will accept transfers of other trusts completely, which we do. The other piece that's critically important to understand and feel comfortable with is how the money's invested. This is the money that you've set aside. It's caring for somebody you love dearly. And all of this information should be right up front, readily available to you. We have an investment policy statement, which is just a document that outlines um, how we treat the funds in Visible National Trust for every beneficiary. And our particular approach is to preserve capital, maintain purchasing power, and liquidity for distributions. And then we customize the investment portfolio for each beneficiary, depending on their timeline, spending needs, other things. And we review those ongoing. So not every time the market says it's down 300 points, but regularly and when there's a need or a change for a beneficiary. Another piece you'll want to look at is how do you get the money out? What's the process? For us, it's basically as easy as requesting a payment from your bank out of your checking account, just paying a bill. Instead of paying a bill yourself, you fill out our pay a bill form. We ask for a tiny bit more information, and that we need a copy of the bill and hit the send button, and you should, in a perfect world, not hear from us again unless we need more information or it was a surprise request. And that is, so I'm going to stop there. I can leave it on share if anybody wants to refer back to anything. But I think, overall, gosh, it's just so important to be armed with information about how this to me is the most important thing, how trusts, the functional parts, because this talks about who you're going to be working with on a day-to-day basis. And what your experience is going to be like. And you ought to know how all these parts interact with one another, and how they interact with you and your financial advisor.
Lisa, thank you. I'm gonna jump in here and kick off our Q&A.
Great.
I'm gonna ask you to toot your own horn here if you're good with that. um, here's what I want to know. So what initially, again, I think stood out to me was, from my perspective as someone who is dealing with this kind of thing day in and day out with families, and every family situation is different. I saw an obvious gap in what is actually available to our families, in that we sort of have a pooled special needs trust. And again, I'll sort of say, for those of you who have not or have questions on that, we have a recording on pooled special needs trust within the Facebook group. You can go watch it. And then we've also done recordings on standalone, special needs trusts that have been set up through an attorney and then are administered by maybe a family member or otherwise. You guys are sort of neither. You sort of meet in the middle, and I'm hoping you can maybe say, what is it about Visible National Trust that people should consider as an alternative to those two?
Yeah, the thing that, the giant hole, to Tanner's point, that we saw in the marketplace was working with an individual attorney is great. It assumes that nothing will ever happen to that attorney, which is just not how the world works. So that's just sort of a structural issue. A lot of the existing trust providers in special needs trust land and in pooled trusts in particular are not financial services folks. They're not finance people. They're not investment people. Ultimately, a trust is a financial product. It is a financial solution. And you have to keep up with trust rule changes, all the rule change, like the Secure Act is a great example of that. Talking about IRAs and the stretch benefits. So you need to be working with an organization and that was really the thing that we felt that we brought to the table uniquely. We certainly have the personal commitment, but we also have a really professional understanding of what it's like to work with a special needs trust and how to make it really easy for everybody. When family members are the trustees, it really creates a whole different dynamic where the family member is in a position where they're acting like a professional trust administrator, but without all the support that a professional trust administrator has. And that's really where we felt like we could step in and help. that was really the huge gap. So we wanted to provide a very professional experience and a professional firm, a professional trust administrator. Special needs trusts, just like any other financial product, and they deserve to be modern and functional, and easy to use. Asking a family member to be a trustee is a really hard thing. And our view is our job is to help family members be family members. Um, we hope for active participation by families. Um, People can be an advocate. They can designate themselves any way they need to so that we know who we're working with and who we're taking calls and emails from. Um, so we really like family involvement. Um, we think that's great, but and then it also just relieves that burden for folks where it's really hard to be a trustee. Sometimes we have to say no, um, depending on what's going on in an account, what the spending needs are. Um, and there's some tough things, and it's a lot of financial geekdom too. And families, it's enough. Families are doing a lot, and they're being caregivers, and they're being loving partners and friends, and that's a great thing. And we feel like our job is to make a special needs trust solution very affordable, easy to work with, um, and just kind of a no-brainer as opposed to a really complicated thing that people get stuck figuring out what lawyer do I hire and how do I write this individual document. You don't really actually have to do all of that work. You can you can use Visible, and we've got the trust document. You could certainly have an attorney review it. Um, and we're kind of off to the races pretty quickly, which is great. It does not take us very long, a week or two to get an account from beginning the joinder agreement to set up and able to accept funds. So it's quick, it's easy, and it's got all the component parts and the keeping up with the legislation and so forth, and the CPAs. That's our job, and we're here to support families, not replace them, but support them so that everybody can have the time they need.
Thank you, Lisa. Two things I want to say on that, and then we have some questions in the group chat that we'll get to.
Yeah.
One, as you said, and I think this is the key, in an ideal world, family members, whether it's a sibling or somebody else, their job is just to love their sibling, right? To just be their sibling or to be their whoever they are to that person. And it removes sort of the concern or the worry of, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. I'm not a professional, right? I'm a professional in loving my sibling, but I don't know how all of this works and I don't want to screw it up, right? To sort of put it in a real language here. I think that's how a lot of us feel. And so I think that's, exactly what you said. I think that's something that is huge and should be heavily considered. The second thing that I want to sort of share again, and then we'll go to the chat here, that I think sort of helps conceptualize, okay, great, like these are all wonderful things, but like how does this work? Like how does this actually work with a visible national trust? And Lisa and I talked about this offline. Here's the example here, or the metaphor. I don't know the simile. I don't know the difference between those. I can't remember. Here's the example. It's like a 401k. So with a 401k, you're at your job, you pool all of your money, right, with all of the other employees, and then you have a professional, and that professional's job is to invest the money according to the way that you say you want it to be done. And they take care of the investments and all of those other things that we really don't want to have to work or deal with. The opposite would then be, you move that money into your own account, your own IRA, your own whatever. Now that's your job, right? Now you have to pick up, you have to decide, how do the tax consequences work? What investments do I need to be in? And so that's sort of, I think, the comparison there of visible national trust would be like that 401k, where they come in and sort of just take care of everything. They just say, tell us what you need and what you want, and we'll do it. And the other side of it is neither good nor bad. I also want to point out the other side is just more of, great, now you get to make those decisions. And if you're great with that, perfect. If not, then we have a solution here. So,
Yep, exactly. And I
um,
think one other thing I just want to talk about is a
yeah,
practical matter about the idea of a pooled trust. So There are two ways to do these trusts. You can set up your very own, which is the most expensive way because you have to hire the lawyer and the trustee, presumably the same person most often that we see, the investment manager, and so on, all the moving parts that we looked at in that hub and spoke slide. You have to do that. That's really expensive. If you think about, it costs the same amount to feed two people as it does three kind of thing, or one and two, whatever the analogy is. That's really true. It's the most expensive way to do this is to build your own individual house. So think of another way to think about the pooled trust is it's an apartment building. They're different sizes, and that's all great. So you might need a 1 bedroom or a 3 bedroom, or you need this in the kitchen, or you don't need that. But the idea is the thing's already built with a pooled trust, and everybody, instead of having an individual entire trust, they have an individual account, exactly like what happens in a 401k plan or a 403b plan. There's one plan, and everybody sets up their own account and puts their own funds in it. So it's a much more efficient way as a trust company to do it. We can bring you better pricing. We can bring you better services from bigger companies. So we see it as a real advantage, and there's no difference in terms of what happens as a beneficiary family.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. Let me get to some of the questions here. Robert dropped this question in a little bit earlier, asking about costs, and then you showed the slide outlining costs. But the other question is there a minimum? And I think that's also something that distinguishes the difference between a pooled trust and standalone trust. But for Visible, are there minimums for this service?
So it's really hard for any trustee to have all small accounts. And what we see is that we have a couple of ways of handling that. We will happily set up a trust for someone who doesn't need to fund it right away. An example would be somebody, possibility of an inheritance, anticipating a accident settlement. And we will hold that trust until it is funded. That way, a family will have a trust to designate as a beneficiary. So there's no minimum for that. There's a 0 is just fine. We will hold the trust. We will take the trust on officially, complete the paperwork. And once it's funded, then it goes live on the system. Then you can log in and see what's going on. So that's something we recommend. There's no minimum for that. It's really helpful to us to everybody needing to work together and understanding that the trust needs to get to a level of scale for it to really work well. So we look for minimums of over $50,000 is kind of a hard minimum for us. Understanding that somebody who's opening up a trust isn't necessarily going to open it with that minimum. There's going to be a process. So it's really about a conversation with us, and we understand that what the game plan is. We can talk to you about options to get to where you want it to be, but we're able to support most effectively families who want to get to a level of over $50,000, certainly closer to 100, 150 to something in that range. Where we think we fit best is in situations where we don't like the idea that it's very hard, as I said, it's very difficult to deal with the small balances for any trust provider. So we want to work with folks who know that their objective is to accumulate funds for their person, and that we can work on doing that together.
Awesome. And I would also just throw in there, our goal, right, and we've said this in the past, if you've joined us, is we like to think of it as 2 retirements, right? We have our own retirement as mom and dad, and then we have our second retirement, which is the life that our child will live after we're gone. So think
Exactly.
of how much it costs to fund one retirement, double that, and pass that on. That's the second
Exactly.
retirement. So ideally, I mean, there's probably, if we do this correctly, we're going to have plenty of money in that special needs trust, perhaps furthering the want and need to have a professional taking care of that hard-earned funding.
Exactly. Exactly.
Jacqueline, I'm going to go to your question. And Lisa will ask you to give your 2 cents, and I'm happy to give mine as well. She asked, when are you suggesting the special needs trust be opened? Ours would be after both parents are deceased. So then the trustee comes into the picture. When does your organization start working with parents?
We definitely love to work with parents who are still alive. That's really helpful. One of the things that's really important for us to understand is how does, what are the grantor's vision for how these funds will be used to take care of their loved one? So if it's mom and dad, if it's Nana and grandpa, whoever is in that chair, it's really helpful for us to know what the game plan is, and what the needs and wants are. Sometimes that can happen directly with the beneficiary. But if not, then it's kind of mission critical to us, to spend some time with folks before. So if you do the process where it's not going to be funded until, with insurance, say, um, after the death of the grantor, we would love to get to know you long before that happens, because would that we could, but nobody knows when that day is going to be. So we're big fans of preparation, and that's really helpful to us. So I think what we see is there are a couple different ways to approach this. You can set the trust document up, right? You can open your trust and fund it later with just insurance and those kinds of assets. So just bequests, just beneficiary designations. That's one model. To Tanner's point about the double retirement, what we see as being most effective is to start to build a base of funds in the special needs trust. You never know when there's going to need to be a distribution. That's just as unpredictable as being able to know what day is our last day. Um, so the sooner the better, is the answer to that. Some families come to us and their beneficiary is already in the spending cycle, and funds are coming in. So that's another reason you'd open a special needs trust and fund it immediately, is if your person, you're taking distributions to cover expenses. So we see people doing all different things depending on what their needs are.
Awesome. Jacqueline, if you have further questions on that, feel free to drop them in the chat, or come off mute. Shannon, I'm gonna jump to your question. This is a wonderful question, and Shanna's been paying attention in our previous workshops. We've drilled this in. Shanna's wonderful. So Shanna's question is, what happens to the funds that have been placed in this special needs trust when the child passes away?
Yes. For us, it's very simple. They go to the designated beneficiary. If the funds were placed in a special needs trust by the beneficiary, Medicaid gets theirs back first. And then whatever is left in the account will then go to the designated beneficiaries. So it's a very simple story. That's what happens to everything with the exception of Medicaid taking their cut, and whatever minor administrative expenses there may be, taxes due, that sort of stuff. So we clean up the loose ends, Medicaid, and then that doesn't apply to third-party trusts. And then you're off to the races, and the money goes back to the family or whoever the contingent beneficiaries are, residual and contingent beneficiaries.
So said another way there, Shanna, in sort of the way that we talked about in our previous workshops, is the pool, as we're talking about today, Visible can work with first and third party special needs trusts, right? So the third party is set up by persons that are not the person with the special need or disability, and those are therefore not subject to Medicaid clawback. Whereas first party, which exactly is what Lisa said, is, comes from a settlement or, malpractice or an oops inheritance, those kinds of things, that would be a scenario in which that first party could be subject to Medicaid clawback. So just depends on where the funds are coming from. Jacqueline, I saw you came off mute. Did you have a follow-up question?
I do, because I kind of feel like I came in the middle of a play because I'm not really clear. But one of the things I wanted to ask was, and I think now you kind of answered it, but I still don't know when you would recommend this special needs trust be open. We have been told we have now a special needs trust in our will, and we'll be talking to the attorney again to make sure, everything's in place. And then once we are gone, everything goes, the assets go into the special needs trust. And at that point, the beneficiary, which is going to be my daughter, who cannot handle these decisions, she's going to have a trustee help her make decisions on how to do the things within the trust. One of the things I heard you say was maybe open it before that, but I've been told there are not really good tax advantages to doing that. And there's some issue with that. So I'm trying to figure out for us, and I can actually do this in an appointment. I'm on Visual National Trust, and I can see that I can schedule an appointment with you.
Yes, you
I'm
can.
still really confused when I open this trust. And
Yep.
I have heard that some trusts are not recognized by Social Security, and I don't understand why. So I'll be, asking those questions. But anyway, so I just want to know, in our case, when do we open it? When makes sense? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do understand, and if I'm going to say it back to make sure I actually really do understand. I think I understand. I'm going to say it back to make sure I do. The question is, what you've set up is a trust that will be triggered by your will.
Correct.
Effectively. So what you don't know is who all the moving parts are going to be after that.
Right.
You don't know it didn't sound like you knew, and forgive me if I'm overstepping or incorrect here, but wasn't clear who the trustee will be. That's a really important decision. That's the person who's in charge of saying, yes, we can pay this bill.
Well,
and here's how we're going to invest this money.
We do have a family member who's agreed, and we have his daughter who's agreed. But when I do all this research on what a trustee has to do, I don't really understand. I don't really think they understand what they signed up for. So I would like them in the picture, but I would like a third party trust company who is giving them direction and helping them make those decisions. So they would still be in the picture. They just probably wouldn't be the prime, because everything you're saying, yeah, I didn't plan on that. But so this is great. But anyway, exactly. I'm sorry to take so much time, but
no, that's really that's the crux of the issue. So that's an incredibly good question, and definitely just book some time, and we'll have at it. That'll
okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Yeah, good follow up there. And obviously Lisa would, she will get all of the answers that you need. Same thing with me. If you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to either one of us. I'm going to go to Steph. I was really hoping someone would ask this question. So Steph, I'm glad you did. What if you already have a special needs trust?
Mm-hmm. You are allowed to have as many checking accounts as you want. And it's exactly the same thing with special needs trust. There's no rule about how many you can have. They also are portable usually with the permission of the trustee. In our case, it's written in there. Pooled trust can be transferred. If you have an account at a pooled trust, it can be transferred to any other pooled trust. Has to be blessed by the trustee. So they actually have to participate in the moving process. But the reality is nobody should hold you to a trust that you want to update or do differently. The objective is to have people be, at least our objective certainly, is to have people be in the right place with the right trustee for them. That's the most important thing. So you can either create another trust if you already have a trust, or you can, and you can move money from one trust to another. That may be an option, and we can talk to you about that. And you could, so there are ways to handle that depending on what you're trying to do.
Great. And one thing I'll throw in there as well, kind of goes back to the timing, right? Kind of two times we can do this. The legal terms would be standalone versus testamentary. Standalone meaning it's there, it's right now, we have it. Testamentary meaning it's going through the will or through the family trust, which Lloyd, I'll get to your question there in just a second. But I think that's sort of the point is, so long as mom and dad are alive or whoever is the grantor of the trust, we can change this as often as we need to. It's just when they pass away, especially if it's mom and dad who are the grantors, at that point, the funnel of all assets would sort of accumulate. And at that point, it could become irrevocable. And so we can change this as many times as we need to while you're alive. We just want to have the best option right now. Lloyd, I'll kind of sort of answer this hopefully quickly, and then if you have a follow-up on this, she asked, what's the difference between a special needs trust and a regular family trust? The short answer of that, I would say, is a special needs trust is designated specifically for a person with a disability or special needs. And again, the purpose of a special needs trust is, well, we have a second retirement to pay for, but the rules say that if we want to receive public benefits like SSI, SSDI, or Medicaid, we cannot have more than $2,000 in our name worth of assets. And so a special needs trust is designated specifically to be able to house money for the beneficiary, which is the person with the special need or disability, without it counting as an asset against them. That's sort of the purpose of a special needs trust, whereas a regular family trust is just a way to more efficiently pass on assets to any other beneficiary, whether it's family member, a charity, an organization, whatever it is. But if that didn't get you what you needed, let me know and we'll talk through that a little bit more. Okay, I think those are all of the questions in the chat. If any of you, I think we've got maybe just a couple more minutes. If any of you have any other questions, please feel free to drop them in, come off mute. We've got our expert here, so take advantage of Lisa while we can.
Hi, this is Diane, and I have a question. I'm not quite sure how to ask the question. This is kind of, so my son is autistic. He's 24. When we lived in Colorado, we did put a special needs trust together because at the time he did qualify for benefits in Colorado. He did graduate from college and he has a job, and that's why we moved to Utah, because he has a job. He is employed, so he doesn't, we never filed for Social Security, the SSDI or whatever here, because he makes too much money, which is, I'm blessed. We are blessed. We are glad. We are wonderful about that. But yet how I still have this in my head, there's still a chance that this doesn't continue or something goes awry. That's why we made the plans. Can we still have the special needs trust, but yet he might not, if he doesn't need it, does that part not kick into play? I mean, that's where I guess I'm kind of asking.
Well, let me tell you just for a second about, I want to connect to Tanner's excellent point about in the now, you can set something up and modify it.
Okay.
And which is great. So you have time. For the way we would handle that is we would make sure we fully understood the timing, where things are, where you see them going. And we would consider opening, not fully opening that kind of, we'll leave it, we'll sign the document, we'll make the trust, but it's not funded, it's not operating. We might consider a trust for you in that stage, because that way, if there's an urgent need, it's all so fast. We're kind of 90% through the process. If you need us to do anything as trustee, and then you can kind of keep us posted. If it turns out that the disability isn't an issue, we just don't ever fund the trust. You don't fund the trust, and it never exists. And that's just fine.
Okay.
But if there's a possibility out there that things could get better, but they also could stay the same, or they could get a little bit worse, that's an excellent reason for putting a trust together now, to give you the options. Ultimately, to fund the trust, somebody does have to meet the Social Security definition of disability, so it's going to be permanent.
Right.
And lots of income is not super helpful.
Right.
in the
Right.
process.
Right. And I sure don't want to say, oh, don't work so you can qualify. I mean, that's not where we're going, but it's just
Right, no, that's nuts. Yeah, exactly. But there's no reason why you can't have it kind of on that standby setting.
Okay. I like that standby setting phrase. Kind of like it doesn't
Yeah, I
necessarily
might
mean
go with that.
Yeah.
I like that too. Thank you for that idea.
Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Mache asks a really great question as well. What if you don't qualify for disability benefits? Do you need a special needs trust?
If you don't qualify for, well, so that's actually, okay, we get that question a lot too. So here's
Yeah.
the reality. If you're never going to qualify for benefits, then you're not a person who qualifies for a special needs trust. So ultimately, what you need to be is someone who does meet that definition, meaning Social Security would approve you if you asked. Or we all decide that to the best of our abilities to judge the situation. That's the case. You absolutely don't need benefits. You don't need to be on benefits to open a special needs trust, not at all. So if it's and for a lot of people, it can be a really helpful way to have the funds managed by a third party, by a trust company. And we can do that. So if we think somebody is going to be able to qualify, be a special needs person, special needs is a legal term in this case, that's just fine. So you can certainly open up a trust and take advantage of all the benefits of having the funds be in a trust, the record keeping, the access, all of that, the advice, without taking benefits in the moment.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. Michelle, if you have further questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, but I think that's the key. Just if you don't qualify, then yeah, you wouldn't qualify anyway for a special needs trust. So
Right.
Ben asked the question, can a special needs trust have two beneficiaries, or does each person need their own special needs trust?
Yep. Yeah. One beneficiary per trust.
Yep. And so further context on that, Ben, what I've seen a lot of times is we'll have like one family trust, let's call it, right? Like if they have 3 kids and 2 of the kids have special needs or disability, the family trust will house all the assets. And then there will be, an offshoot for the person, the inheritance piece to the person who doesn't have a disability. And then there will be a standalone special needs trust for each person with a disability. Yep. Great question, Ben.
That is a great question.
Okay. We'll hang on a couple minutes here. If any of you have any last questions that you want to throw in here, we really appreciate the questions. And thank you to Lisa for knowing so much and for creating this for us.
It's about time,
Right. And thank you to Eric for, broadcasting it and making sure that people like me found out about it. Okay, we do have another question that came in here from Loida. Are disability benefits different from DSPD and SSI? I am new to these things and I still don't understand a lot, but I feel like I've heard many times that these benefits are always income-based. I guess this is when the kid is still a minor, then he gets them when he is an adult.
So
Yeah,
rather than
Lisa,
even attempting to answer this question, Eric Jorgensen, who is with us today,
Eric, you weren't expecting to have to talk. Here you go.
Yeah, you were. And I won't make him talk, but what I will say is you can if you want to, obviously. We are really thrilled to have Eric with us. Eric is a tremendous expert nationally in disability benefits. So he's part of Visible. And one of the things that Visible families can take advantage of is free Eric. Eric comes with a relationship with Visible National Trust. So he's in charge of beneficiary services and our advisor support as well. But what that means as a practical matter is specific questions about your particular person. Eric can talk to you about those in the context of setting up a trust. So if that's the most helpful way. And then Eric, if you want to answer the question.
Well, can you I'm sorry, I kind of zoned out. I have some drama going on at my house. So just repeat the question?
Yeah. Are disability benefits different from DSPD and SSI? She, says I'm new to this.
DSPD, is that Utah's waiver benefit?
Yeah, that'd be Utah's waiver. Yep.
So think of disability benefits broadly as an umbrella term, encompassing all the things that an individual with a disability may qualify. And typically that's going to be a means tested benefit. And a means tested benefit, not to throw more jargon at you, is anything that you have to meet certain asset and income limits, SSI, housing vouchers, food stamps, things like that. So disability benefits would be the overarching term, and DSPD would be a Medicaid waiver for the state of Utah. Every state has Medicaid waivers. that you have to apply for. So when somebody says you need to apply for disability benefits, it's helpful to make sure you understand what they are telling you you should be applying for. Because broadly speaking, it could be any number of things. So the short answer is no, it's not the same thing. I hope I answered the question. I hope I didn't make it more confusing, but so I
Hey,
can
Eric,
kind of nerd out on this.
I'm more surprised that you knew DSPD was Utah. Like, I guess you have all 50 states. Just yeah, Eric knows everything. I knew you did. I'm just still, is so just baffling. That's incredible.
It is.
And Lloyd, just to sort of add on to your question there at the end, yeah, the rules change when the person is a minor versus when they become an adult. When they're a minor, they look at mom and dad's income and assets, and then when they're 18 or they reach the age of majority, at that point, they are their own assets and their own income are what are the determining factor as far as, do you qualify? So great question. And Lloyd, since you are new, I'm just going to throw in the plug. We've done a lot of workshops on those exact things. What is SSI? What is SSDI? Medicaid, Medicare, all of that. Please feel free to go back and watch those recordings. And if you still have questions, you can reach out for sure. Okay. All right. Well, I think that's it. Lisa, again, thank you so much. Eric, thank you so much. This is just wonderful information to share with us. We really appreciate you taking an hour with us to share this. And if anyone reaches out to me with questions, I'll connect them with you. Otherwise, Lisa shared her information here, and hopefully you can get the answers that you need. All right. We'll sign off. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.